Moving on to section 3, we had this question, why was Protestantism able to survive in the Holy Roman Empire? Well, there was real support for the Reformation. So that's one thing I want to emphasize, was there were Protestants who sincerely believed in Protestant Christianity, who wanted to keep it alive. And the Catholics were very slow to realize how serious this was. Charles V realized how serious it was because it was in his realm in which this arose. But France and the Pope, even though they were both Catholic leaders, actually made Charles V's job very difficult by making war on him, right, while he was trying to deal with the Protestants. Now, eventually Charles V got a break and had some success, but by that time the Protestant movement was too large, and so it's not going to last. And we'll end with the Peace of Augsburg, which we talked about earlier, whose realm, his religion, which says Catholics and Protestants both have certain rights. Well, basically you can't. Whoever is king, whoever rules a territory gets to decide the religion, and then everyone who's not the same religion has to leave. That was the rule. So it's not even tolerance in a sense. It's just, we're not going to kill you. You can leave. So if you're Catholic and you're in a realm that goes Lutheran, you have to leave. If you're a Lutheran in your realm that goes Catholic, you have to leave. If you're Calvinist, you can be killed. Why were Catholics so slow to respond to the Reformation? Well, their leaders were more interested in politics, in part because they didn't realize that the Reformation was different. They just thought it was, it's just heresy. It'll go away eventually. We'll just persecute it some, and it will just be done. And that's not what happened. It was too popular. So, and also, you don't debate heresy. You suppress it. So once the Catholic Church said Luther's a heretic, they moved from trying to suppression and didn't really combat it very effectively in terms of ideas. Right? It took Catholics a while to realize, maybe we should actually debate these guys more. And you can see that in part in that their early response was mostly in Latin and aimed at the elite. Remember, Luther started writing very quickly in German, right, to get to average everyday people. It just took a while for Catholics to realize the game had changed, and they needed to compete. Why did some people stay Catholic? Well, of course, part of it was power in politics, right? If you were a vassal, if you were, closely connected to Charles V, you're going to stay Catholic, more than likely. But also, of course, sincere belief, right? Catholics, just like Protestants, could also sincerely believe in their religion. It's important to remember some parts of the Catholic Church had already been reformed and stayed Catholic, so they'd already gotten rid of a lot of the moral problems. So, for example, Spain, Protestant Christianity never really became popular there. Some people maintained a belief in the teaching church. So they said, well, Luther, you can quote the Bible, but this is what the church says. I think it's the true teacher. And they may say, Christians, including people we recognize as saints, have believed this way for centuries. So how can this new idea be correct? How can innovation be correct? And of course, many continue to believe in the power of the sacraments and a traditional devotion, right? Remember, Luther, confession didn't help him feel better about things. And that was one reason why he is going to go this different route. But if confession makes you feel better about things, you're less likely to reject it. Catholics could also quote the Bible. Catholics, once they figure out they need to respond, they will also quote the Bible. They'll say, well, Luther, that's your interpretation of the Bible. This is our interpretation of the Bible. And Catholics had an extra argument because they would say, look, the church existed before the Bible. Jesus did not give us a Bible. Jesus established a church. And the church itself determined what books were in it. So how can you use the Bible against the church that is the one that canonized the Bible, determined what books go in it? And as things progress, Catholics would point out that the Reformers disagreed over what the Bible meant. How can this be your sole authority when you disagree about it? Right, that would be the Catholic perspective. And they would also point out that Reformation led to social disorder and war, like the Peasants' War. Charles Borromeo, we'll go through really quickly through him, because we just went over these people in true and false. People had some questions, though. Remember, I said that one reason Catholicism is able to respond and survive is, in a sense, because of these reforms. And I chose that come out of the Council of Trent, and I chose four Catholics who I thought exemplified these reforms. So each person is a kind of different way of reforming. Charles Borromeo is the bishop who cleans up his diocese. He says, okay, priests, you guys got to become educated. You got to stop having concubines. You got to do your stuff. You got to do things right. You got to live good moral lives. And he made the priests so angry that they tried to shoot him. Right? That's what that stained glass window is. But he's an example of a bishop who was a real bishop, right? Who first and foremost was interested in shepherding his flock and was interested in reform. Angela Mercy is another example of this. She was, as we talked about before, she has this, she's a visionary. She gets lots of visions from God. And one of her visions, God tells her he wants her to educate girls. So she forms an order of nuns dedicated to educating young ladies, especially in the faith, right? Especially in Catholicism. And I mean, it makes sense. You want people to know their religion, but especially now there's religious competition, right? Catholics who don't know their faith are more likely to become Protestant. That would be her argument. Teresa of Avila represents the reformer who is also a mystic, right? Teresa of Avila was a nun, right, who would want to reform her order. She said, the life of a nun should not be easy, it should not be simple. Or, I'm sorry, the life of a nun should not be easy, it should be simple, and it should be hard, right? We need to suffer just like Jesus suffered, right? So she's going to become a nun. But before that, she had these 2 years of mystical experiences in which she felt union with God, but in a very painful way. But it was a kind of ecstatic pain that she didn't want to stop, if that makes sense. And I'm not going to read through it here, but I gave you this example where she describes this. Who was Ignatius Loyola? What are the Jesuit Society of Jesus? So this is another reforming order, but they're very different because to maximize flexibility, they're not going to follow the prayer schedule of monks. They're going to have their own prayers that are easier to say so they can focus on taking action in the world. They do this primarily through education and through missionary work. Right? They're going to focus on education and missionary work. They take 3 traditional vows of the monks and nuns. These would be poverty, chastity, obedience. You shouldn't have a lot of money, you shouldn't be married, and you should be obedient to your superior. But they take a special 4th vow to go wherever the Pope wants them to go and do whatever he wants them to do, which I always like to joke about because the current Pope is himself a Jesuit. So does he take an oath to himself? I don't know. And remember, he's the guy that said, if the church says that black is white, then you should believe it. Right? So he emphasized this idea of a teaching church. What are the characteristics of the Reformation in France and the growth of Protestantism there? Right? Well, early on, when Protestant Christianity shows up in France, it will be condemned. They will take action, violent action. They will kill people who are Protestants, who are public about it. But as long as they're quiet, there's no problem. But then you'll remember in 1534, all of a sudden, a group of Protestants put up signs overnight in several French cities saying how the Mass was an abomination and made God angry. Catholics were not happy about this, and this led to a persecution of the men who had put these signs up. In the wake of this is when Calvin actually flees to Geneva. Catholics will engage in increasingly harsh edicts and actions against Protestants, the Huguenots, right? This doesn't work, right? This doesn't work. Protestant Christianity will continue to grow. And even though not that many people would become Protestant, only about 10 to 15% of the population, 50% of the nobles become Protestant. And that's enough that we're going to have civil war, right? The key thing is that there was a large number of the French leadership that became Protestant. And in 1561, in an attempt to diffuse the conflict, the Catholic king of France says, okay, we're going to tolerate Protestant Christianity. We're going to tolerate these guys. And this, to us, seems like a good deal, right? That you wouldn't see this as starting leading to war. But it does. And this is question 10. How did Huguenots respond to the Edict of 1561 that gave them some tolerance? They responded by preaching against the Mass and images, and in areas that their nobles controlled, attacking Catholic churches and attacking Catholics. So that's kind of the problem in this time period. They haven't gone through enough experience yet of war and fighting. So there's this kind of idea, the other side is demonic, right? Catholics view the Protestants as demonic, the Protestants view the Catholics as demonic, and so you need to fight. So rather than responding to tolerance by saying, okay, good, let's kind of be responsible, and let's try and get along with our Catholic neighbors, it's like, okay, good, we finally can get revenge on those Catholics for killing us, right? We're going to do that by attacking their churches and attacking them. So it's unfortunate. So that leads us, next question, how many French wars of religion were there? What were the different sides? You don't have to remember the exact number, but there were 8. And I just wanted to emphasize that because there were a bunch. It took them a long time to figure out to get along with each other, right? It took 8 wars. And I do want to remember, though, it was a 3-way struggle between moderate Catholics. These were the monarchy, right? They were Catholics, and they wanted to keep France Catholic, but they also didn't want to continue persecuting the Protestants because they said, if we do this, we're not going to have anyone to rule. And we want to end these wars. Then there were the Protestants, and then the conservative Catholics. The Protestants wanted to make all France Protestant. The conservative Catholics wanted to make all France Catholic. What role does religion play in the siege of Magdeburg? We already kind of talked about that, was that it wasn't simply a series of people massacring each other, right? If you contrast this, what we see with 1561, right? This is 70 years later. We actually see a decent amount of tolerance between Catholics and Protestants, right? It's taken them a couple generations, in a sense, but they're finally learning that they're just going to have to put up with each other, in a sense. One student asked this question about the reading guide. How does Cortez stake a claim to Indian land? We already looked at that, right? That's where he brings out his sword and cuts the wood, or cuts the tree, and they read a proclamation. Then there was this question about Gonzalo and Aguilar. Their names won't appear on the test, but one thing to think about was, remember, Gonzalo was the guy who, remember, their group had been captured, and a bunch of them had been sacrificed. Some of them had become slaves and worked to death. But Gonzalo had been treated nicely by the Native Americans, had a Native American wife and kids, so he was happy. He didn't want to go back to Spain. And when they said, think about your soul, he said, kind of like, I don't care. Aguilar, remember, he was a priest who had been captured and enslaved, and he was quite happy that the Spanish were back. No one had any questions about Catholic